Welcome to Builders, the podcast for leaders who want to build great company. I'm your host, Alex Snyder, strategic advisor to world-class builders. This podcast dives into the wild rides and personal transformations that come with pursuing big dreams and becoming a leader who builds incredible teams and companies. Each episode, I'm joined by a guest who helps deliver a fresh perspective designed to leave you feeling less lonely, more connected to innovative ideas, and inspired about growing your business your way. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite channel, leave us a 5-star review, and share your favorite episode with a friend. The podcast is sponsored by Alex Snyder Advisory. If you are a business leader or executive team ready to take your leadership and company to the next level with a high-performing team, we'd love to see how we can rocket fuel your growth. Check out the show notes to book your free Builders Business Booster call, where you'll receive a strategic leadership audit and 3 concrete focus areas to mature and grow your business. All right, thanks for tuning in. Let's build. Welcome, Nicole. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Super excited to be here, Alex.
Yeah. Nicole, you and I go way back. You were my first client in my consulting career after my MBA. I met you on my first day of my job at like 8 a.m. before I met my colleague. And we spent a considerable amount of time together. I spent more time with you than I did with my first year. And it's just, I really treasured our relationship from those first few years working together and carrying that through to my foray into entrepreneurship, and now yours. I was actually just saying on an interview yesterday how I see you among the mentors and influences in my career and in my life. So it's been such a pleasure, and I'm so thrilled to have you here.
I can't believe that we come full circle to this. So it's just a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. I'm so thrilled.
I know. And I'm so excited that we're working together again in this iteration of my career and this iteration of your career.
Exactly.
It feels very serendipitous and very meaningful. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself because you are amazing, and I would just love to hear it from you.
Well, thanks, Alex. And it's so funny when we were chatting about our history, and like I was there for a first in your life, and you're now here for a first in my life. I just find that's the beauty of those relationships that you build along the way in your life. And it's a great segue into sort of my career. So I've spent 30 years in the corporate world, as you were part of that, a big part of that, and worked my way into more senior leadership roles in large multinational companies that were located, that were global operators, that were at the top of their field. And I had a few sort of cataclysmic events in my life that caused me to pause and reflect and think, how do these influence my journey? How do they change who I'm going to be into the future? So after being the head of HR for major companies, managing communications, managing safety and environment for major extractive and companies that had an impact on the world, I had sort of 2 cataclysmic events in my life that changed my journey and caused me to start what is now Synclusiv. So I think everybody saw what happened in 2020 with George Floyd. I'm a Black woman who has navigated a world where I have been underrepresented, but frankly, not really aware or have normalized the fact that I was underrepresented in that world. And I never really consciously thought about the fact that I was an exception. Without being exceptional, I was an exception. And so I was confronted with that in 2020, and it was jarring for me, and it was disruptive in not a positive. It ultimately ended up being a positive way, but it was not a positive way at the outset. And then another cataclysmic event happened in my life in 2021, other than the cataclysm that hit everybody, which was the pandemic. So one person who's been a really meaningful person, of course, in my life. She gave birth to me, my mother, who was always this trailblazer, this take no prisoners, powerhouse of a woman. She was like a storm. She just was one of those people who never felt that there were any barriers, anything that she couldn't do. And she was a real great role model for us growing up because we looked at her and she didn't consciously think about that there were barriers. She just didn't see them, recognize them. And then she was confronted with cancer. And unfortunately, she passed away on her terms. She didn't suffer for a terribly long time, but it was absolutely earth-shattering for me. And it caused me to not recognize myself. And I had to say, how do I reinvent? How do I stay true to the woman who raised me and my values and channel all of that anxiety into something that can be a positive influence? And I really said, let me live a life of purpose. My mother lived a life of purpose. She started a charity over 30 years ago that has been responsible for issuing over 300 scholarships to Black youth in Montreal. And I said, I'm going to live a life of purpose. And how better to do that, but to take all the experience that I've gathered over 30 years in the corporate world, all the experience I've gathered over working in the DE&I space, and really channel it to be able to be a conduit and a support for organizations in their journey in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we started Synclusiv. And so that's really how I became who I am today, which is not who I was when you met me 15 plus years ago.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I am always so intrigued when people are able to alchemize what are, life-shattering events of any kind of nature and alchemize that into something so positive, so purposeful, so impactful for the world. It's truly amazing. And I will say it is a theme for this season, probably a little subconsciously for me, but just we've had a good friend of mine who's taken his own depression and near suicide to build men's mental health organization. And the list goes on. Nicole, thank you for sharing. And just such an incredible start. And I remember talking about purpose with you when I was making my transition as well. I think it is something that can be a great driver. And I think it's something that if more people allow themselves to tap into and to be curious about and to follow, it took me a long time to figure it out. And I'm still pursuing that purpose. But I know that I've helped people along the way and it's really helped me. And I think that's like a really beautiful thing that I heard from your story. Like you did something that made you feel more aligned and more purposeful. And in the process, you've transformed some of your clients' businesses and who have hundreds of employees. So you are making the difference in all of those people's lives.
And you said it well. I think purpose becomes an anchor. It allows me to always stay true to why I do this and what I do. So it becomes that anchor that guides me and that keeps me grounded to why I do this and why this is important. And it allows me to be consistent and faithful mission and vision of Synclusiv. So yeah, it's been really a wonderful journey so far.
Amazing. Well, it's perfect because I was just about to ask you to tell us a little bit more about Synclusiv as an organization. What's the mission of Synclusiv? What's your vision for it?
Well, okay. So Synclusiv is really, well, let me explain why we started Synclusiv as the consulting firm that it is. I was working with a very dear friend of mine, Caroline Codsey, with her not-for-profit organization, Women in Governance. And in that role, we created a parity certification that has now become, I would say, the premier tool for organizations that are assessing their journey to equity in the workplace, particularly on the women's equity and the representation in the workplace. And we were getting to the point where we were getting ready to celebrate a milestone where we were going to have 30% representation of women on boards in Canada. And everybody was getting ready to tap themselves on the shoulder and say, wow, we've reached this incredible milestone. And then when I looked at the mosaic of the women who made up these board roles, there was something really striking about it. And what struck me was there was a jarring lack of diversity amongst the women in the senior leadership role. And it struck fear in me. And the fear that it struck in me was we're getting ready to celebrate this milestone as if we're done, as if we've achieved the goal, which frankly, 30% is not the goal. For the world out there, 30% is not the goal. You may have content yourself with that, but we will not be done until there is equal representation. But that said, we were getting ready to celebrate this milestone. I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to celebrate this milestone. And I will be a part of this celebration, having worked in this space. And I would have been disingenuous to people from the community from which I hail, and my daughters and the future generations of Black women. I spoke to Caroline about it, and that was the catalyst for starting Synclusiv. Caroline joined me in starting that now, and now we're going on a new path, but she's been instrumental in getting us to this point. And really, that was the catalyst to saying, how do I take what I know, which is the systems that have created the status quo? I know those systems. I helped support and create those systems. I manage those systems. So I am keenly well positioned to help organizations to unpack that. Right. And then forge a new path forward that is much more inclusive. So what is Synclusiv? Synclusiv is an organization that what is different about us is we really are adapted to where a company is today and where they want to be in the future as it pertains to inclusion, equity, and diversity in the workplace. And the place we come from is less the metric of diversity and more the environment in which you foster diversity. How do we create the right environment where diversity will be a product of that environment and work for much more sustainable into the future, as opposed to an event? It's something that's really a process that ultimately you get to, and then it's sustained into the future. So we look at it through three bubbles. We look at how do we change mindsets and behaviors of people and employees and build more awareness around how inclusion plays a role in success in an organization and how you play a role as an inclusive person in the workplace, but how inclusion benefits you and how it benefits you the way you navigate your job. Then we talk about the systems that underpin the way we work. We look at how you communicate in the workplace. We look at HR systems, recruiting, talent. We look at how you manage performance, how you pay. And we also look at supplier diversity. How are you making sure that the interactions that you have with the stakeholders reflect these values that you profess to have within your organization so that you're coherent and cohesive in the way you operate within the organization and you operate. So it's a really holistic approach to transformation in a company.
Yeah.
And so that's what Synclusiv does. And we've been really fortunate to have had impact on major multinationals and small to medium companies that are embracing diversity and equity and inclusion as part of their journey.
I love that. I love what I heard is you're not just building the structure, you're actually making sure the foundation is there to support the structure as it was built, as it grows, as it undergoes whatever pressures. That kind of fostering the environment and the foundation, I think, is so critical. And of course, not surprising with your background that you understand. I mean, you've talked about the catalyst that made you make the leap and this. Did you always want to be an entrepreneur? Was that something in the back of your mind?
No. In fact, I was one of these people. Listen, I'm a person who loves security. I grew up in an environment where I always felt secure. I was enveloped by two loving parents who fostered an environment of security my entire life. I've been in a relationship with my husband for 36 years. I I'm a person who likes security, and the corporate world gave me security. Systems are what systems are, despite the fact that the corporate world is always transforming and disrupted all the time. I lived in a space that was largely pretty stable and secure. So entrepreneurship was always something that there was two reasons why it never appealed to me. One was, as a feminist, I found that it was an easy out for male dominated structures to be able to say, listen, let's push women into entrepreneurship rather than put them into positions of decision making in major corporate roles. And that to me was no, you're not going to be left off the hook of putting women in decision making roles in major corporate and political positions in Canada, North America, and in the Western world, and use entrepreneurship as a panacea for women to come up. So I always had this thing in the back of my mind, like, no, I'm not letting you off the hook. So
And not a panacea.
Yeah, no.
Also, yes, there are more women entrepreneurs, and they're so underfunded.
Everything. You know what I
Facing
mean?
all the same crap in different ways. But yeah,
That's, as I've discovered, in exponential ways, like that you're not really aware of when you jump into entrepreneurship. The second thing was, so really it wasn't something that appealed to me for like feminist reasons, but also because security is so important to me. So I never saw myself as an entrepreneur, but I love it. It is, I am so glad that I took this leap, but something had to be true for me to take this leap. Financially, I'm very secure.
Yeah.
So it was just in the perfect place to be able to make this leap and make it, to keep that peace. Remember, I said security is important to me. So it allows me to keep that piece that's fundamentally important to me, which was security, and explore this new world, which I'm absolutely loving.
Well, I think that I love the point you're making, because so often people talk about like startups as people who have an idea in university and drop out and go and make $1 billion. It's like, yeah, those people are 1 in a billion, right? Most entrepreneurs are later in life, and actually the successful entrepreneurs tend to start later in life because you have a foundation, maybe financially, but also of skills and network and knowledge and how the world works and how business works and all these things that you can bring to bear, right?
Well, you know what you're thinking as you were sharing sort of your journey and why you leapt into sort of the middle of the process from the first startup to instead of at the beginning of the process, which, believe you me, I went through. And I was thinking back to when we talked at the beginning about, I was literally your first client, you fresh out of your MBA. And if that work that we did together was in any way a reflection of the work that you did after, so that folks there who are listening to this, if you have any idea of the intensity of the work that Alex and I did in those first few years together, it was the equivalent of 5 years of my experience in terms of the intensity of even those first few months. We worked days that were like 16, 17, 18-hour days. Like we literally get 2-hour snatches of sleep here and there and come back to we were doing major labor negotiation. And both of us were new to this, and we were both learning as we went. Now, the beautiful thing was they were some of the most successful negotiations that company had ever had. Unfortunately for me, it made me get tapped on the shoulder as the negotiator for the company, which is not something I could not do with that intensity regularly, but that was the outcome of that. But we really learned in the fire.
We did. And it's funny because I remember that we spent 8 months on that first project.
Yeah.
And at the end, I remember you were like, great, we're done. Like, I appreciate you, but I need you to leave. Like,
yeah, I don't want to do this again.
Oh, okay, cool. I guess I have another project to go figure out. But then within 2 weeks, you called me and you said, we got another mandate for negotiation in this other business page. We embarked on another project.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the intensity of that first 8 months, I remember, and we were traveling to remote locations. You and I shared, like, talk about client intimacy.
Oh
We
yeah.
shared like an apartment at one
Apartment.
point. I'd be up at 3 in the morning.
Oh yeah.
Like, hey,
Oh my
what are you
God.
doing?
It was brutal.
Sleeping into modeling overnight, getting up to talk everyone through the model, and then going to get another 90 minutes of sleep before.
You know that I had such PTSD from that whole thing. I
Mhm.
couldn't stay at that hotel. I told my assistant, I cannot stay back at that hotel
Oh,
again.
I can imagine.
I had to find another hotel when I visited the location because I just could not stay at that hotel again. Yeah, all this to say that I think you got, like I said, a PhD.
Yeah.
In the corporate world, in the tenure that you were working in that space. I had the more typical evolution of a career because I came in that time when you just slowly moved up in an organization and then you moved into more senior leadership roles.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how different you can start a career, right?
Yeah.
I mean, your point, I jumped into a really intense, very corporate, very unique situation, having basically never worked in corporate. I did the odd accounting gig and things in my temp time, but I had always worked for, small businesses,
Exactly.
small team, really figuring things out. And suddenly I was coming off the MBA with all of this knowledge and a little bit of like application, just straight into it. But I'm so grateful for those two.
Oh,
I think they really combined to allow me to then come back into a whole other startup space is different than small, medium business and be able to leverage both of those to get her done.
yeah, exactly.
So what would you say, is there things that you did take from the corporate world that really helped you build Synclusiv?
Yeah.
What were the takeaways and parallels and things that did
Well,
help the jump?
the corporate world, what it really taught me, what I learned in my 30-year, career in the corporate world, like the things I got very clear on who I am, what drives me, what I do well, and what I don't do well. So I had reached that point in my career where I didn't feel I had anything really to prove. And so I could really come at things with authenticity, with a real clear vision of what I bring to the table and why I can bring value to an organization. So I would say that my 30-year history really gave me clarity on my strength and where I'm not, what I wouldn't be advising clients on because it's just not my strength. But it also taught me about the value of surrounding myself with people who know what they're doing and people who do things that I don't do well and giving them the space to do those things. And so I learned that in my career that I can sincerely talk about the value of diversity in team because I lived that. And I saw what happened when you had homogenous groupthink in a team and you had diversity of thought and a safe space where people could actually bring their true selves and their ideas to the table. And so that is definitely what I brought and learned that has been served me so well at Synclusiv. We're a small and mighty team and everybody brings something unique and that we value to the table and complement each other and complement me. I'm not looking to be the expert in everything and I'm not looking to be good at everything. And I really value those people who bring something else that I don't bring to the table. So that I definitely learned.
Yeah, I love that you said that. And you and I were chatting before and we talked about generations of leaders now, there's less ego, right? Or just generations, And I think I speak to that. I say, you need to maintain the audacity and drop the ego. And that's really about self-awareness and humility and having the mix. And I think it's amazing that you learned that in corporate because I don't necessarily think corporate supports and teaches you that explicitly.
No.
You figured that out.
Rewarded in the corporate world. Ego is rewarded in the corporate world. And that I struggled with and I struggled that even in my entrepreneurial space because a lot of the advice I've gotten is you've got to promote yourself and you've got to be out there and you've got to like go to these press the flesh events. And it's just not who I am. And I just, at this stage in my life, I want to be who I am. I want to be authentic. And and that may mean that I'm not going to be a billionaire. So I'm fine with that. It may mean that I'm not going to be a multimillionaire. I'm fine with that. If I can help companies move the needle, that's why I'm doing it.
Right. I love that so much. So what have you learned so far? You're on 3 years into this entrepreneur journey, not counting, I know you worked with other organizations.
Yeah.
Like, what have you learned so far?
Oh, gosh. Well, I've learned that the things I hated in the corporate world, I hate in the entrepreneur. So I'm not a real fan of the admin side of things. And it's from the outside looking in, all is the fun part of being an entrepreneur, like the creating things, the making things happen. So from the outside looking in, that really all I thought, and I was really naive about not recognizing that there's a whole load of administrative sort of management related tasks that's not my strength. And I'm a person that if it's something I don't like, I will put it at the bottom of my list and like really prioritize the thing. I know this about myself. And then I'm
I
getting
just want to make sure every entrepreneur is listening to this because we all do that.
Then create a crisis for yourself because you've pushed something. These administrative things are must do. They have to happen. Yeah. And rather than put them to the bottom of your list, just check them off at the beginning, get her done,
Eat the
and
frog.
get her out of the way.
That's
So what things you want to do.
Yeah. Eat the frog. It's like
Yeah.
first thing you want to do in the day is the thing that you hate, don't want to do. You get it done and then you move on to everything else. Otherwise, it will go from day to day to day.
And it mushrooms into this thing that you almost get terrified about. Now I've pushed it out way too long.
Yeah.
And now it's become a crisis. And it didn't need to be a crisis. It wasn't a crisis when it started. But you pushing it away and waiting has created a crisis. It also can cost you money, folks. Just FYI, learn from me. It can end up costing you money. And that's the other thing I learned is these things that you have to do that you push off. In an entrepreneurial space and in the corporate world, you don't see any of that. You don't see what's behind the curtain in the corporate world. You get these budgets that get assigned to you. There are money that no one really thinks about where that came from. It just is there. And you manage that budget. And you know that next year you're going to get another budget assigned to you. But that's not how the entrepreneur world. If you don't make that money, there's no budget there for you.
Yeah.
And if you don't pay your taxes and do all those things or get yourself registered in the ways you're supposed to get yourself registered. And so inform yourself about the things you need to get done, the mechanics of being an entrepreneur. I did not spend enough time informing myself on the mechanics of being an entrepreneur. That's the first learning. The second learning I have is do what you know. And it doesn't mean you can't be an innovator because we innovate every day in our space. But the fundamental, the core of what you do has to be, in my opinion, needs to be something that you know or are passionate about learning and knowing more about it so that you can become knowledgeable and expert in what you do. The reason why we have an incredible retention rate of our clients, incredible success with our clients that we build on year over year, and we attract new clients, we do what we know. And that's why we do it so well. And we have measurable impacts for our clients because of it. So those are the two key learnings that they're like the two Jiminy crickets that sit on my shoulder that remind me about this.
I love that.
Two things, you will be fine. You'll be okay.
I love that. And for those listening, Nicole's first point, there are a surprising number of ways. If you are not used to every single department that would exist in a corporate structure, that is what you are managing in entrepreneurship. And so there are activities you can put off that are revenue generating, meaning you don't have money coming in or you have it coming in later than you need it. That can cost, obviously that costs you money in a different way and it's not coming in. There's to your point, taxes, compliance, maybe all the things that you have to do where if you don't do it, there could be penalties or interest or worse, frankly. And also a lot of time can be lost if you have to deal with a bigger issue. And then there's the more nuanced things around like banking. Like what, how and when do you pay for things? And does that impact how much it costs? Where does your money sit? Did you have a process to make sure everything you're like, do you have a credit card that you can earn points on? Do you pay your credit card on time? Like all of these things a lot of people when they start, it is literally them doing all of these things.
Everything.
All of it. And it may not sound like a lot, but it really is. And it's where that like, if you don't carve out time to just do it, it can be really problematic. And I think that's the other benefit of being a little later in life is you sometimes have the resources, the knowledge, but the resources to have help a little earlier, right? Like you're a 21-year-old college student, you're not going to really probably be able to bring anyone in to help. I know in my case, I was adamant about, I just had hired a VA and it was like, and I was the little things and I didn't pass off like finance to them, but the little things of just, I really forced myself to walk the talk and to have support and to use the support and put the time and effort in from literally day one of this business. So I was still at a VP role, but I had this business and I just hired somebody and I was like, I will figure out, but I'm adamant that I was not going to do the things I preach people.
Literally.
But that's a privilege of a six-figure salary while starting my business. That is not the case for a lot of people. So
Exactly.
I love that point. And so you've told us what you've learned. What do you love about this journey? And maybe are there special milestones, memorable moments that you really felt like, okay, like I made it, or this is really meaningful?
Well, actually, before I answer that, you just triggered something that I do want to share as a third sort of learning. Surround yourself with people you can trust and that if you have a niggling doubt that something is not working the way it should, listen to that voice in your head. And that was a learning for me because we ended up in a certain situation as a result of someone who I think was well-meaning, but was not well suited for the work that they were doing and did not share that they were not doing it properly. And we ended up resulting in some things that we had to untangle. So listen to your gut, surround yourself with people who you trust and that you're really confident they know what they're doing. So what are the major milestones that we had and the things that I love? What I love is I love that moment when I'm with a client and there's that light bulb that goes off and that spark in their eyes of, oh my gosh, I get it. Or I love that I'm seeing this change that we said we were going to see. And like those sorts of things that are so rewarding. And it's so funny because you go into it's a business and you want to make money. But if you were to ask me the things that make me the most excited about doing this job and being an entrepreneur is what the successes of seeing a client see the results and the outcomes that we worked together to achieve. So that has been huge. So just to give you some examples, we had a client that had set a 5-year goal for literally feedback and the pulse of their employees on what they were observing in terms of the transformational journey in DE&I. And those first surveys, the feedback, we hit our goal of our 5-year goal in some of the metrics in year 1 and 2. Now I told them, don't get too excited. I said, I really want to see that sustained because we're in this for sustainable change. We're not here for like event, flavor of the month. We're here for really putting in place foundation. So those are the milestones that really hit me. The other milestone for me was that moment when I realized that this is something that I could do for the rest of my career, and that we could actually affect change. And you and I were chatting about this. We're living in a time that can be heavy. Like we had a debate around the Sunday dinner table a few weeks ago about, in my opinion, this is the most, I would say, tense, um, heavy time that I've ever experienced in my lifetime. Sociopolitically, geopolitically, it's just really a really heavy time. And you yet feel powerless
Yeah.
to be a part of positive change. And the way I characterize it with the team is, we may not be Desmond Tutu or Martin Luther King. We may not effect change on a grand scale, but we will effect change one conversation, one client, one experience at a time. And those changes have collateral impacts within the network of each individual that you touch, you change, you influence. And that's my goal. I'm not seeking to be on the cover of books or the cover of Billboard. I want to be the person who quietly helps an organization to transform itself sustainably. So this investment that they make in DE&I is an investment that yields return, because they've invested in it for 40 years and it's yielded pretty spotty return.
Yeah.
And I want to help them to yield sustained long-term return.
I love that. I want to come back to that, but before that, I want to also just ask, you mentioned you don't love the admin. You learned what you do and don't excel at, or what you're what you're most likely to put off. But is there anything else that you don't love, or maybe more that what's like the hard lesson that you've learned along the entrepreneurial path?
Honestly, there's nothing else I don't love about the entrepreneurial experience. But one of the hard lessons that I did learn is, as hard as I worked in the corporate world, and you and I were just talking about the crazy hours that we kept and intensity. I mean, I was on a plane every week flying somewhere in the world, and sometimes 14, 20 hours away.
Yeah.
And so I lived a really intense life in my corporate career, but it is nothing compared to the workload that I had as an entrepreneur. So if you were to ask me, one of the things that are I wouldn't say negatives, but thing people need to be aware of is it can be overwhelming. There's moments where you're going to feel really eclipsed, overwhelmed, stuck, because you can just get really overwhelmed by all the things. Some things become a perfect storm. You've got way too much client deliverables in an intense period. Like, there's an intense period where everything's coming together and everything's due at the same time. We have a small team. And so those moments, the only thing I can say to people is ride those moments. You will see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's part of being an entrepreneur and owning your own business. You're going to have those moments where you just feel really overwhelmed. And that's when surrounding yourself with the right support becomes so important. I shout out to Alex, and Alex, it's like, Alex, help. And she grounds me. And so, like, another thing I want to share with this audience is, Alex and I are both in this consulting space, in very different worlds of the consulting space, but the value of the right experts, the right support around you to navigate those moments where you're overwhelmed, and people that you trust. Like, I trust Alex implicitly. I can share with her even when I'm having a bad day and when things like emotionally I'm struggling. And having that support has been the biggest reward, despite being also the most challenging piece. Really, that's, if we're going to talk about the biggest aha for me, is the things that serve me in the corporate world about surrounding yourself with the right talent, the right support, the right people, Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a million of them. It just needs to be a small group that you've got each other's back and they've got your back, and you just, yeah, it makes a difference.
There's a saying I love, which is who, not how.
Yeah.
And it's really about knowing who's around you and who you can reach out to when you want to get things done or solve a problem. And I think that speaks to team, it speaks to peers, it speaks to mentors, network. It really, if you can shift that mindset to like who, not how, I think that is so powerful. And I love that you shared that, Nicole, because it's just real. And if any entrepreneur says they don't have moments of overwhelm, then get out. And I wanted to just, I guess, add on to that from my experience is overwhelm does not equate bad. It doesn't mean that you have so many problems necessarily. It could feel in the moment like, I don't know how we're going to solve this, or I don't know how we're going to do this, or I don't know how we're going to get there. Absolutely, those moments exist. But it can also be, honestly, I think there's an element, and I don't want to get too woo, but when you're leveling up, there's almost like when you have a big expansion, there's often like a contraction that you can just want to curl back to what you know, what's comfortable. And so sometimes when things are going well and the work is paying off and you're making that next step, that also can have overwhelm components. And I think that can be really confusing for a lot of entrepreneurs because you're like,
no one wants to no one feels sympathy for the fact that, oh my gosh, you're growing too fast. And people are like, what are you complaining about? Why are you overwhelmed? But that's exactly what overwhelmed us. We grew rapidly, and I felt like I was running behind my business instead of ahead of my business. And I had to take a moment to say, whoa, I've got to get ahead of my business so that I'm very intentional about how this grows, and it doesn't grow despite me. And then I don't recognize what that business is because I was behind here watching it grow instead of ahead, guiding and stewarding that growth. And
love that you
so
said
right.
that. It's not a paid ad, but this is where I'd say if you don't grow with your business, if you don't do the work on you and your leadership, your business will outpace you. And that gets so messy. And so it's almost as if, you're on a course, and as a leader, if your business is getting ahead, you need the shortcut. And the shortcut is, to your point, often
I brought you in.
expert.
I called you.
Yeah, you called me. Exactly. Right.
They made it.
That's what I do. And it's because you see it, right? And there's 100 ways that can happen. It's not a masterclass on leadership, but I just love that you shared that because I think, again, it's to your point. Yeah, nobody's like going to cry into your millions of dollars. But like that. But when I can think of recently where I'm like, all the things I set for Q4 are happening. I have this and this opportunity and that opportunity, and it's great, but it's a lot. And it's also a lot of visibility that makes me want to go run and just hide back under the blanket. And I have had days where I've had the vulnerability hangovers after doing different events or interviews or whatever. And it's so hard because it's tough to explain if people haven't been through it. And so again, this is why I'm such an advocate of making sure that you're really clear of who are the peers, who are the people you can call, who, even if they don't fully get it, will listen, right? I think there's a lot of people who are like, will hear that and just not understand it because they haven't been through it. And even entrepreneurs, if they've built something that doesn't require them, in this example, to be in the public eye, then they'll be like, that's what you wanted. Like you said, you wanted to line up this and this, and now it's happened. Like,
what are you whinging about?
Like what's the issue? So I think I love that you said that. And I think that those are hard lessons. But again, entrepreneurship is all about not letting the hard lessons stop you, right? So it's the self-awareness, the recognition to then, okay, cool, like new challenge. And that's a big part of resilience and just figuring it out. So I want to come back to, you talked about companies have been working on DE&I for 40 years. Yeah. Right. These are words that are part of our common lexicon, but I think they're used very interchangeably, maybe not accurately. So let's dig a little bit into, what is DE&I? Let's make sure that if people have made it this far with us in this journey, that they do get the benefit of your expertise. So what is it? Maybe how also has the world changed,
Yeah.
and why do we need it as much or more today?
So that's such a great question because it's like when I worked in HR, just to give a parallel example, everybody thought they knew HR better than HR people. So everybody thought that they recruited better than HR recruited, that they knew compensation better than HR knew compensation. This person needs to get paid this amount. Never mind that it's going to create complete pay inequity within your structure. And DE&I is a similar space. Everybody thinks they know what DE&I is, but when I have real deep dive conversations with my clients, they discover that, holy crap, I really didn't understand what DE&I was. So one of the things that I think is a reason why DE&I has not been successful for, let's say, 50, 60 years that we've been really talking about DE&I is a lot of the focus has been on the diversity aspect in isolation as a metric. So we've set ourselves this metric of we will have achieved diversity if we have these numbers of people within our organization. Sometimes those numbers have been anchored in who knows what. Sometimes these numbers have been anchored in we just want to put in the minimum so that you'll shut up and stop talking to me about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that to me is one of the issues. So diversity is we are all diverse. Diversity is everybody. Everybody is different. Everybody has something that makes them different in some way, shape, or the other. But there are certain groups that, as a result of their diversity, are much more marginalized and underrepresented in the workplace and in society and in decision-making role than others. And when we talk about D&I, we're generally talking about that group of underrepresented people. But I think what we should focus on is, because we tend to focus on the differences more than the commonalities, we all have moments of vulnerability for something that makes us different from the others around us. So diversity is something that we actually all share. Equity is what I was talking about, the underrepresentation of certain groups within the corporate structures and decision-making positions in organizations. Mm-hmm. And the space that I love to occupy is inclusion. And people try to use different words to refer to inclusion. Every once in a while, I get people saying, oh, we're not using inclusion anymore. We're using belonging. Oh, we're not using, don't get caught up in the semantics of it, please, because that to me is a smokescreen to the real issue.
Right.
Let's focus on action. And yeah, exactly. Don't think you're going to get me mixed up in all that stuff. We all know what we're talking about. We're talking about people being able to be themselves in the workplace. And I'm going to give you a really start of a recent conversation I had with a client. I have a client who is a Black woman who has been in her job for a short period of time in a senior leadership role in the organization, reporting to the CEO. And every time I saw her, she had these long Godiva locks. Long, straight-haired locks, which is a wig. And then we had a meeting and she was wearing her very natural hair. And I said, oh my gosh, your hair looks beautiful. I said, why don't you wear your hair like that all the other times I've seen you? Oh, they're not ready for this. So that's just a very simple example of that you all may not be aware of the way that people are switching who they are in order to fit into your workplaces. And Synclusiv wants to work with organizations and to help organizations to break down those barriers so that a woman can wear her hair like mine is naturally, come to work and bring her best self to your workplace so that she can be a catalyst to performance, to driving the next hurdle that you want to overcome as a business, and is not distracted by all these other things that are meaningless to her ability or their ability to be able to deliver performance for your company. The space that I think we need to occupy. We've spent way too much focusing on numbers only. And it's also caused us to do that flavor of the month approach. Yeah. of, okay, we've had a situation like Harvey Weinstein. Everybody, let's start the Me Too movement and focus on women. And then drop women because we had a situation like George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or Breonna Taylor or any of the myriad of other Black people who have been gunned down or killed or murdered or lynched. That caused us to say, drop women, let's focus on. I literally was having conversations with clients saying, oh no, we're not focusing on women anymore, we're focusing on Black people. And like, nah, you create inclusive workplaces and they will come.
Yeah.
And will come. And you will resolve the issues for all people. And then people can change. People are not static. Evolve. They change, they grow, they're different, how they identify changes and evolve. And if you focus on these little communities in isolation, you are going to miss the broad swath of communities that are to come and that are existing in your organization today. So, yeah. That's really why we started Synclusiv. Focus on inclusion, the rest will follow.
You mentioned the flavor of the month is obviously like a common issue. Is there any other common misconceptions or challenges that you see out there that anyone listening should be aware of if they're working on this in their organization?
So one of the other things that people should be aware of is focusing on people who look different, but who behave and think and act or approach issues and problems and work in exactly the same way that everybody else did before them and the dominant groups did before them. That is pointless. Yeah. It's pointless. So one of the things that people need to be aware of is, and that's another reason why we focus on inclusion, is when you get these sort of performative approaches to DE&I, you tend to get people who do the things that they have to do, twist themselves into a pretzel so that they fit into the construct that you have in your workplace. That frankly means that you don't reap the rewards of diversity, equity, inclusion. So you're like bringing in people, but you're not getting the benefits of that because they're just thinking and bringing to you the exact same thoughts, approaches, and everything else that everybody else would have done. Yeah. And they're not getting the benefit of that because they're not able to be their true selves in the workplace. And they know it. And they, or even worse than that, they've actually normalized not being their true selves in the workplace. I was one of those people. I normalized not being who I was in the workplace.
Wow. Yeah. And I love that you pointed out that you're not going to get the benefits of diversity if that is the way that you're approaching it. So I think that's so important because we just, at this point, you cannot deny, like there's so much research is very clear about the value of diversity. And I know, it was one of the reasons I felt so comfortable partnering into the first startup that I joined was the diversity that was there and that had been, I want to say consciously and unconsciously built. Like I actually don't think it was super consciously, but it was just such a value of the founder and it's such a value of mine that I knew was a value that was so important. It would help us overcome other differences and that we had the ingredients that I consider really critical for success.
And Alex, you were attracting the best talent.
Yeah.
You weren't leaving, you weren't dealing with the talent pool this small. You were dealing with the talent pool this big. Like, that's really what corporations need to realize.
Yeah.
You're dealing with the smallest talent pool. Open your talent pool up and you just you don't know who you're missing.
And we were attracting, like you said, we were fishing in the biggest pond and allowing people to be who they are also allowed them to bring their ideas to the table about the work and about the company. And that was, again, something that I knew was the foundation for a lot of the things we needed to be successful. I mean, I have a million more questions we could talk about, but I want to be respectful of your time. I know for those listening, we try to keep it reasonable. So just really quickly, what's next for Synclusiv?
What next? Well, really, this year is about stabilizing to get ready for our next leap. We have a few products that we're getting ready to launch. Look out for that code. And so really what we want to do is make sure that we're delivering the best for our clients, that we've got the right structure within our organization for growth. So this is a real transitional year for us to set us up for 2025 and beyond and who we're going to be as we grow. So this is going to be the year to get us ready for who we're going to be.
I love it. All right, we have a couple wrap-up questions at the end. They are rapid fire. You can absolutely just pass on anything, but they're just a chance for people to get to know you beyond the business things that we've been talking about. So first question, is there an experience that changed your life? And if you may have already covered that. But
Yeah. Mom's death changed my life. There was Nicole Piggott before 2021, and there's Nicole Piggott since. And part of my grieving and my self-discovery and transition was accepting that I say goodbye to that person that I was before.
Yeah. Good. There's a very good point there about grieving yourself.
Yeah,
And grow is massive.
exactly.
What does the word strategy mean to you?
Strategy means setting yourself up for the future. That's what it means to me.
Love it. Is there a book you've read that changed your perspective on something?
There's many books. Frankly, what I would say is articles have had much more of an impact on me than actual book. But it's funny, the book that I would say that had the biggest impact on me was a book from, I don't even remember the author, but what it essentially said is you have the relationship with your employees that you deserve.
Ooh.
And so when you start questioning, why don't I have high engagement, or why don't I have the relationship and the culture that I want in my workplace? That changed everything I do in the work that I do, was that notion of how do I help organizations to deserve the employees that they have?
I love that. And last question, if you could go to any concert tomorrow, touring or not, dead or alive, who would it be?
Bob Marley.
Oh, that's such a good one. I think that's the first Bob Marley we've gotten. I love it.
I go to Bob Marley. I go to Bob Marley in my dream.
Well, Nicole, it has been an absolute pleasure, which is not a surprise. We always have the best conversations. Where can people connect with you if they want to continue the conversation, check out more about Synclusiv?
Well, look us up at synclusiv.com, or reach out to me on LinkedIn, Nicole Piggott, or send us an email at info@synclusiv.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks for tuning in. Our goal is to create connections and inspire conversations about building great companies. So please subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast with your network. Sharing is caring. If you're a business leader or executive team ready to take your leadership and company to the next level with high-performing teams, we'd love to see how we can rocket fuel your growth. Check out the show notes to book your free Builders Business Booster call, where you'll receive a strategic leadership assessment and 3 concrete focus areas to mature and grow your business. You'll also find the link to join the Builders Club to stay up to date on upcoming events, get valuable tools and insights, as well as be the first to receive exciting announcements straight to your inbox. No spam, I promise. You'll also find my website, alexsnyder.com, and all the places to peep my creds, hear what clients have to say, and see if I went to the gym today. And one final note, this podcast is not intended to be legal, tax, or other professional advice. Thanks for joining. We'll catch you on the flip side.